Inside your June Tailor SewByNumber tote package, you will find the packaging card. The packaging card specifies the amount of fabric you need to purchase in order to create one tote. The instruction sheet is packed inside of the batting and tells you the cutting dimensions for all of the pieces of the numbered batting. There's instructions that explain how to sew the pieces by number, as well as construct your tote and create your handles. There's strapping included to create those handles, and of course the printed batting. The printed batting has both the tote section as well as the strap section. We're going to start by cutting out the tote. We'll set aside the straps for later. You can use a rotary cutter or a scissors and simply cut around the perimeter of the tote, leaving a 1/2 to 1 inch margin on all four sides. It doesn't need to be perfect. However, you want extra batting around the outside so that you have something to hold on while you are piecing the center by number. I finished cutting out my tote pattern that was printed on the batting, and we have our straps that have been printed, and we're going to set these aside now. The next step that we need to do is cut our fabrics. This particular tote pattern is made with all 2.5 inch strips. You can choose to purchase pre-cut 2.5 inch strips and cut them down to size, or you use yardage fabrics. Regardless if you're using yardage fabrics or pre-cuts, we recommend that you start your fabrics first. June Tailor makes a starch called Quilter's Starch Savvy that's been designed specifically for quilting cottons. Other starches, however, can be used. You want to starch your fabrics in order to make them nice and stiff. A stiff fabric will cut much easier, maintain its straight lines, and during the construction process is going to give us nice, crisp seams. So we recommend that first you start your fabrics so that they're nice and stiff. Now that our fabrics are starched, we can start our cutting process. You could use 2.5 inch pre-cut strips, as I said before, or you can cut your 2.5 inch strips from yardage fabric. I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can cut your yardage fabric into strips depending on the tools you have available to you. One way is if you have just a scissors and a ruler, you can measure and cut those. Because we starched our fabrics, they're relatively stiff. So you're going to want to start by taking your fabric and placing your ruler on the fold and lining up a line of your ruler on that fold of fabric, because you want a nice straight edge, so we'll mark that line. And then we're cutting 2.5 inch strips, so we're going to find the 2.5 inch marking on our ruler and place that on the line we had just drawn. And then we're going to draw our next line. And there we've drawn our 2.5 inch strip. So we can take our scissors and cut right on that line, very carefully and very neatly, so that we have an accurate 2.5 inch strip. Another method, if you have a rotary cutter and a rotary cutting mat, you can take your fabric and to fold it in half so that you've got like your selvage edges and the bolt fold right there, and place that on your mat. Make sure that the fold line is on one of your inch lines of your cutting mat, and you want it overlapping the 0 line on one side so that you can square up that edge so it's nice and straight. And then using a rotary cutter, cut in the 0, and then you're going to cut at 2.5 inches using the markings on your cutting mat and the markings on your ruler to get your 2.5 inch strip. Another method for cutting 2.5 inch strips is to use the Tailor shape cut ruler. This ruler has rotary cutting slots at 1/2 inch increments up to 12 inches so that you can cut up to 12 inches of fabric at a time to your desired width. In this case, I'm cutting 2.5 inches, so I'm going to take my fabric, and this is the bolt fold plus the salvage edges, and we're going to fold this, place it on our mat, and then take our shape cut and put the 0 marked line on that bottom fold. You always want to start by squaring up the fabric, so I want all my extra to go beyond that 0 line. And then I'm going to cut right in the 0 slot. And because again we're cutting 2.5 inch strips, I'll cut in the 2.5 inch, and I can continue, say I want extra strips of this particular fabric, and cut in the 5 inch slot. Now this gives me perfect 2.5 inch strips that I can now subcut to fit my pattern. Now that we have our fabrics cut into 2.5 inch strips, we can follow the instructions for cutting them down to the specific sizes to fit the numbered pieces on the batting. Now if you want to decide what your pattern is going to look like before you sew it up, it can be kind of fun to take your batting and lay your fabrics out first. This way you get a better idea of what your finished tote bag will look like. So I can take different pieces and lay them on the batting to determine how I want my finished tote to look. Once you have them laid out, you can take a photograph and know exactly what size to cut them based on their position. Now that I've selected which fabrics I want to use and which numbered spaces, I can start cutting them down to size. We have our 2.5 inch strips, and pieces 1 through 9 are all 14 inches. So I could take my ruler and my marking pen, and I could mark the lines on the strips and cut them, or I could use a rotary cutter and cutting mat. I kind of like to use the rotary cutter and cutting mat because I can take my fabrics and layer multiple pieces on top of each other and cut them at the same time. So I've got 3 pieces piled up here, and we'll place them on our cutting mat. I need 14 inches for pieces 1 through 9. So I want to make sure that my salvage edge goes beyond the 14 inches. Take my ruler, and I can cut at 14 inches and 0. And I have 3 pieces cut and ready to sew onto my batting. We'll continue cutting all the pieces 1 through 30 to fit on the batting, and then cut the binding, backing, and strap fabric.